Yo, partnership alert, partnership alert, partnership alert. Living Corporate has a partnership with LinkedIn Learning, an American massive open online course provider that provides video courses taught by industry experts across a wide array of subjects. Now, the partnership is because Living Corporate has courses on LinkedIn Learning focused on diversity, equity, inclusion for leaders, career professionals, and anyone really looking to upskill themselves and be better allies. So make sure you check out our courses on LinkedIn Learning by clicking the link in the show notes. And let's just say you don't want to do that. When you go to LinkedIn Learning on LinkedIn, search Living Corporate. We'll be right there. All right? Peace. What's up, y'all? This is Zach with Living Corporate. Now, look, every week, we're coming with incredible conversations, frankly, across our entire network, from Liberated Love Notes to the Leadership Range, to the Access Point, to the group chat, to the break room, to our flagship show here. And today is really no different, except it's a little different because this interview is long. I ain't gonna hold you. We had a really good conversation. Ruchika Tulshyan and I had a really good dialogue about just not only her latest book, but just like in the landscape of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the reality of non-Black folks in DEI spaces and balancing or really honoring the legacy of Black leadership and Black thought leadership, particularly Black women. If you're not a Black woman in these works and in these spaces, it's a very broad, just a far-reaching conversation we had. All of it about diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of it about leadership, all of it about purpose and identity. So I'm really excited to get into it. Because it's so long, I don't even want to give y'all too much lead in. So we're going to tap in with Tristan. You're going to hear this conversation between Ruchika and myself, and then we're going to let y'all go, okay? All right, see you soon.
What's going on, Living Corporate? It's Tristan back again to bring you another career tip. This week, I want to talk to you about how you can gain some clarity on what you want to do for a career while also gaining some new skills. With many people out of work due to COVID-19, now's a great time to gain some new skills, knowledge, and contacts to set yourself up to get back to work or to change careers. Many of us are looking to invigorate or reinvent our careers, but aren't sure how to do it. One of the ways I always suggest is taking on a couple of projects outside of work. You can sign up for sites like Upwork, Fiverr, Thumbtack, and more that have sprung up to support the gig economy. Maybe you've wanted to break into social media marketing or sharpen your skill sets in sales. These sites offer an opportunity to set up a profile, bid on jobs, and have people request your services. You get to set and negotiate your rates, helping you sharpen yet another skill set. All of the projects you take on do not have to be in direct alignment with your current or potential new career path. These are great opportunities to expose yourself to new and different types of work while gaining clarity on how you work best and what you may or may not want to do more long-term as a career. If you decide to go down this route, remember that you are gaining real-world experience. Therefore, you want to create a project section on your resume to include the relevant projects and showcase your new skills. When writing your bullet points, focus on the value you've provided and the results you've created. This will show a hiring manager or recruiter that you are taking the initiative to learn new skills and test them out in the real world. Taking on projects is a great way to clarify what you want to do while earning some additional cash. They also help you position yourself to either re-enter the workforce or potentially pivot your career. This tip was brought to you by Tristan of Layfield Resume Consulting. Check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Layfield Resume, or connect with me, Tristan Layfield, on LinkedIn.
Ruchika, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me today.
It's a pleasure to have you back. Not to bury the lead, I'm excited to talk about your book in a little bit. I know that it came out a couple weeks ago. But it's interesting as I think about your book and just the work that you're doing and your own company and the consulting that you do. It's kind of like, I feel like we're still in the season where everyone's trying to kind of hit a lick off of diversity and inclusion, right? Like everyone's still trying to kind of, it seems as if there's this I don't know, like where everyone's all of a sudden was a diversity and inclusion expert.
You're so right, Zach. I mean, I would say this is what's been a really interesting thing about this whole time. I mean, I feel like since 2020, there's been a huge rush into this field. It's frustrating. It's confusing, I'll say. It's frustrating on the one hand, because I see a lot of harm being done when folks, don't really understand what's at stake. Clearly just think it's, sort of something you can rush into because it's lucrative, it's trendy. And by the way, when I say lucrative, I mean for some. And it's trendy. And then I think not recognizing and not having the self-awareness to recognize the harm that's done when people who aren't really invested in this work and who haven't been grounded in it for so long and don't have this sort of historical understanding and context. So there's that side, which is really tough to watch, and then sometimes that makes me feel like I need to defend my position, especially if around people who may not be familiar with who I am and my work. And then on the other hand, maybe the part of me that does feel a little bit excited is at least I don't have to constantly keep explaining what this is. And I do remember a time where I was asked, why is diversity important? And, what does inclusion mean? And, why should we care? And give me the data. And the good news is there's much less of that. There's still some, of course, it's not magical, but there's less of that. So it's a very confusing time to be in this industry. I'm curious, what do you think?
I'll say I think that, I think capitalism continues to really reign supreme, right? Like I think, and I think that it's scary that like we continue to exploit, black and brown thought leadership for financial gain. Like this season has been just kind of gross, right? I've talked about that talked about this a few different times. It's like you look outside and it's like everyone is talking about diversity and inclusion, and like very few, if any, are really connecting the dots to actual organizational change. And then I also think like especially since the summer of 2020 with the murder of George Floyd, and all of the protests and things of that nature, I think also like, a lot of language, a lot of kind of fluffy language has now become mainstream. And so people, I've listened to like conversations where people just string together like a bunch of different multi-syllable diversity or quote unquote diversity inclusion words, and it sounds really good, but it's like, okay, what did you actually say? Like the intersectionality of our reckoning with the decompartmentalization of our communities or whatever. It's just like, what are we actually talking about right now? You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're so right. And something that's come up in my mind a lot, and I'm going to explore a little bit of it in my writing because it's been a little bit damaging, honestly, and painful in a way that I was not expecting. But something that's been on my mind a lot is the use of the word ally as a noun, not a verb, and actually seeing very problematic behaviors from people who are supposed to be, our quote unquote allies, who are in this work because they really believe in it, supposedly. And then you see the harm that's done when there's fragility, when there is even an opportunity in many ways to amplify and pass the mic to, and for me specifically, I think, the mic needs to be held by certainly, brown people, but really led by Black people, and especially Black leaders in the social justice space, right? Like forget diversity, equity, and inclusion for a moment, but really justice. And what's become really difficult to see in the last few years is also that use of ally as a noun. I'm an ally, and therefore whatever I do doesn't, it like my intentions don't matter. Sorry, my impact doesn't matter. It's only my intentions that matter. And that has been really on my mind a lot as we think about what does it look like to make true organizational change.
It's interesting. I am so sick of that term ally. Like there are people, especially over the last couple of years, and even a handful of folks this year who introduce themselves to me and be like, I just want you to know I'm an ally in this space. And every time people say
Gosh.
that to me, I'm like, okay, if you're an ally, cool. Like, can you invest $100,000 in a living corporate? Like, what are you saying? Like, I don't know you. And you know, you're absolutely right. Like, allyship is not a noun; it is a verb. It's an action that you actually take.
Hmm.
You know, like what
Like
resources,
investing $100,000 in living
like
corporate.
investing $100,000
Yes.
in living corporate, or
Yeah. Yeah.
introducing me to your literary agent. So because
Right.
I have 3 different books I'd like to write. Like there's all types of things. Like actually, you know, leveraging your
Mm,
brand and
mm,
sharing your capital and resources
mhm,
is allyship. All of this stuff around like, you know, you wanting to just kind of be, I don't know, like just you want a pat on the back or whatever. Like I'm, you know, and I talked about this even like a couple years ago when George Floyd was murdered. It was like
mm,
I
mm,
don't need you to check in with me. Like I have friends. Like I have people that look like me,
mhm,
but I have a community of people that like know
mm.
me and who've known me for years. Like I'm not gonna call you Stan from accounting. I'm gonna talk to my friends, right? And like I do, and
I can imagine Stan from accounting coming up to you and saying, "Listen, but I'm an ally."
right,
And you're like, "Where do I even begin?" Stan
right,
from accounting.
right. But yeah, no, I mean, I think you know this the idea of just sharing, right? Like of like really being willing to give up space and give up something for and like and not to helicopter over the person when you give it to me, but give it to them and back up. Like that's rare, right? But like and that's what when I just talk about like when I go in, I just talk about capitalism. I just see all these things. They're just all inextricably linked. Like a friend of mine, his name is Eric. He said, you know, capitalism is white supremacy in action, right? It's like it's just like the inherent action of just like of exploiting and exploiting folks' thoughts and time and their labor for your own gain, and like you know, and so it's hard for us to like decouple ourselves from that mindset. Like we're always okay, what's in it for me? How can I get up on this? How can I get over as and so this and like scarcity, like the attitude of like, hey, there's only so much to go around. I can't give you X amount of dollars. I can't give you my contact to my literary agent because you know maybe I want to write a few more books in a couple months, or
My gosh.
I can't share clients with you because you know these are my relationships, and what if I lose business because you do something wrong? Like there's and it's like, you know, it's really easy for that mindset and for those attitudes to just kind of like permeate what we do, like this spirit of this attitude of competition and needing to like defeat everybody, right? So like, I don't know, it's just it's tough right now. And I also say like,
Mm,
you know, this as I look around, like I'm pivoting out of you know, I've pivoted out of consulting and
mm,
I'm in the tech space and
mm,
I'm seeing how white supremacy shows up in these spaces as well. You know what I mean? Like you know, there's no industry or space like in this capitalistic context that isn't plagued by you know
mm,
these problems. And so
mm,
what I see when I think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and like in this work, is so much right now is like focused on how to commoditize, how to commercialize this work, and how to you know how to make it appeasing and appealing to
mm,
you know to the audiences, to the masses for again for commercial gain. I've seen folks like claim products
mm,
and solutions do something to solve for diversity and inclusion, and they don't do it at all, right? But it's a way to make money, right? It's a way
mm,
to get over, and so it's tough, right? Like truly, it's tough. Let me ask you this though, like you know, you talk about like because of this era and this climate, like you haven't had to explain your work or why you're doing the work. I've also seen you like write a few different things on LinkedIn
mm,
and in different talks where you talk about like the propensity for orgs to pursue non-black thought
mm,
leaders and speakers for
mm,
DEI work. Like, talk to
mm,
me about like
mm,
how do you reconcile the fact that like you're not a black
mhm,
person, but you're also
mhm,
you're not a white woman either. Like, what does it look like for you to be who you are in this space, and
mm,
how do you reconcile maybe if there's the spoken or unspoken tension of being of again not being black doing this work and perhaps
mm,
being chosen over other qualified or
mm,
competent black women and men
mm,
and trans non-binary folks in this space.
mm, mm. Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think it actually relates to a little bit what you were talking about earlier, because the way that capitalism has created the system and really white supremacy in action. So thank you, Eric, for saying that. Shout out to Eric here, whom I don't know, but what you said is extremely magical and extremely true and painful as well at the same time. Essentially, so when I think about my role as a non-Black woman, an immigrant to this country, is firstly, I want to talk about the importance of collaboration. And for me, that is really the most important part of what I do. And I don't see my work as anything else. If I don't see it as valuable unless it's collaborative, unless it actually pays homage to, amplifies, builds opportunity, builds ways for Black women specifically, and women of color from other marginalized identities, intersectional marginalized identities, um, to be able to also lead and to also be able to be amplified. So in some ways, I actually see it as a failure if, for example, I'm asked to come into an organization and speak, or I'm asked to. I don't consult so often anymore, but when I do, or even as I continue, long-standing projects that I've had for years, I actually see it as a failure if the outcome or part of the growth isn't that this organization, for example, that I'm consulting with, will actually be able to name, hey, we need to hire, promote, advance, and ensure more Black women, for example, are in leadership. I see it as a failing if I'm asked to come in and speak and I say to an organization, could you share with me your plans for ensuring that more Black women and other marginalized women of color are in leadership positions? What are your thoughts? What are you actually doing? And they're not able to do that. I see that as a failing on the work that I do. So for me, I think everything that I do, really, my focus is on amplification and collaboration. I also think that one of the challenges of white supremacy that has happened and reigned for so long is dividing us. I mean, literally, this was a strategy that the British colonizers used around the world when they came over and took our land in so many countries, but especially in India. And their strategy was divide and conquer. So, by the way, I never say that whenever it's time to, get some work done, or where I'm trying to split up work, I'll always say, let's either divide and simplify, or I'll come up with other words, but I'll never use divide and conquer, because that was the strategy used to separate entire communities in sort of in my ancestral sort of lineage, so, and around the world. So I think that, to me, that gives me so much of pain, because I think what has happened and the fallout of that is, even when we do DEI work, there's a lot of mistrust and distrust among communities of color, wherein actually I think that as we continue to do this work together, especially those folks who are leading with their hearts, doing this work because you literally cannot step away from it, because you know how urgent it is. I think that when we don't band together and collaborate with each other and recognize that many of us have faced oppression in very different ways and also in very similar ways, I think if we don't get together and we don't focus on building coalition based on that, I don't think we're really ever going to be able to make the change that we want to.
I agree, and I think there's value, right, in like us recognizing that there are parts of this journey that we share, and there's parts that we don't share, and that's okay, right? Like speaking on both of them, like the reality of our shared experience and our unique experience. When you think about just like across like Black and Brown communities, it's valuable. 100% agree that like there's a constant angle that white supremacist groups use to just really divide the non-majority groups, because again, like we're more divided, like we're already not
Mm.
the majority, so then like if we could splinter even further, that like that weakens our power. So agreed on the notion of collaboration.
I was wondering how many people, and listeners even know about the origins of the model minority myth that was actually, which is extremely harmful, by the way, to Asian communities and
Yeah.
especially harmful to, Asian American communities. And we know we're facing a lot of pain and challenge right now, which is, by the way, not new, but, hasn't been talked about nearly enough until recently. And even then, um, I think what folks don't recognize is how much the model minority myth was created to pit Asian communities against Black communities. And and in many very painful and sad ways, it's lived up to its purpose. It's created incredible distrust. It's created incredible oppression, among our communities, especially, among immigrant and Asian communities upholding anti-Blackness and white supremacy. And I think, until we reject that notion, until we are very vocally critical of this entire narrative that there is one community that excels because there's some natural ability that they have to excel. It's really harmful. It's very painful. And if we really want to make, again, the type of coalition and change that supposedly we're supposed to as folks in the DEI sort of space, however you identify, whether you're actually, whether you're a consultant, whether you are, a chief diversity officer, whether you're a leader who recognizes how important DEI is to your leadership, I think we have to very intimately understand how these narratives come about and how harmful they are so that we can reject them.
One, amen. Agreed. Yes. I think that it's tough, right? Like it's tough to reject those narratives when, if you've been indoctrinated, to believe them for your whole life. And, I think also like sadly, like part of I'm gonna speak to America is like, navigating America and like climbing in America often involves stepping on Black people, right? Like it's kind of like
Yes.
it's part of
Yes.
like how you
Yes.
progress, right? It's like you like it's rare to see someone who's like proud, like very loudly like pro-Black, pro-Black woman, pro-Black trans
Mm,
woman. Like that's not gonna
mm,
like those
mm,
people aren't often the ones like sitting in the highest seats or getting the awards. Like the people sitting and getting those awards are the folks who, keep quiet and mostly go along to get along. They may pop out and say a few, cool, cute things here and there, but they're not really out there really shaking the table like that. So it's tough. Like, I don't,
mm,
I think we're all like, I think we all are by various degrees, like victims of,
mm, mm,
these systems that have been
mm,
in place and incentivize
mm,
anti-Blackness by
mhm, mhm.
some degree. And so, and not only incentivize anti-Blackness, but also like, hold up whiteness as the ideal and the
Yes.
and the goal, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's tough.
And what's sad is the reality of how much it harms you as you, a non-Black person, so myself for example, how much it harms us to buy into that myth and uphold that. And I've realized it in so many small and big ways in my life, right? And as an immigrant here, so I've lived now in the United States for a total of, I'd say, 11 years. There was a period in between. I moved out and I came back, so continuously the last decade is, I've been in America since 2012 continuously. And what I will say is, in the beginning, like all immigrants, and especially all immigrants who come in on these very problematic visa categories, but whatever it is, highly skilled immigrant, as I come in, clearly the path that we are shown very overtly is, uphold white supremacy, buy into whiteness, buy into white ideals of professionalism, authenticity, blah, 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 and reject Blackness. So be anti-Black. So, I come in and obviously I do not have the language. I do not have the maturity. I don't have, the lived experience at that point to even fully acknowledge my own sort of what I've experienced as an Asian woman, an Indian woman, a woman of color into this country. I don't understand it. And of course, so I set out and I'm like, yes, I'm going to get a professional job. I'll be in the technology industry, first as a journalist. And every day, in so many ways, that approach failed me every day, from all. I mean, there's there's what folks call microaggressions. I call them exclusionary acts and behaviors. But from dealing with those, to never finding myself represented, to never really feeling like I could be myself around anyone. Later on, as time went on, probably the biggest, I'd say, slap in the face for me, and I know the word slap right now is controversial. So, the moment where I think the mirror was really held up to me about how painful and lonely this approach was when I became a mother, and becoming a mother of color here in a very white city in Seattle, really not being able to connect with anyone, being rejected by white parents, though the journey supposedly of parenthood, and I know you know this as well, and the journey of parenthood is supposedly supposed to admit you into this club where you can then ad nauseum talk about sleep cycles and whatever it is, potty training and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's supposed to give you access to this club where magically everyone's supposed to connect and feel empathy. And what I found was the deepest lack of empathy, of actual harmful behavior, of actual rejection when I became a mother of color. And so began, in many ways, the process of decolonization for me, where I started recognizing that not only is my proximity and privilege to have proximity to whiteness through my accent, through my ability to speak English, blah blah blah, my education, but actually it was as if I was slowly suffocating in all these years in trying to live up to this ideal of, whether it was subconsciously the model minority myth, whether it was the anti-blackness that I clearly had, right? I did not have friends of color really, and I definitely did not have any close Black friends. And really working to decolonize myself, really in many ways trying to save myself from this noxious gas that I was inhaling every day. And I think that's something, and I actually now pity people when I see them who especially immigrants, especially people in my own community, in the South Asian community, who think that they're going to somehow their road to freedom is by aligning with white supremacy and whiteness and upholding anti-blackness. I feel sorry for them because they will always be hurting by doing that.
Ooh, Ruchika coming with the bombs. Sound man, put the air horns right here. That was crazy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's honest. It's honest. I haven't said this to I mean, I've said this in my circles of girlfriends and, whatever it is, like over glasses of wine, but to be able to say this on a podcast, it's because you create that space and honesty, and you asked me to explain, right? You asked me to explain, what does it
I
mean to be
appreciate
a
it.
non-Black person in this field? And what I'm saying to you is the only way that I have even come close to feeling like I am who I was born to be is now, over the last, actually I'd say 5 to 6 years since my son was born. But it's
Mm.
only now that I feel like I'm getting closer to who I was always meant to be, and that is through the very, very strong rejection of anti-blackness. It is the strong investigation of what is my role as a non-Black person and where I need to step back and get the hell out of the way too,
Mm.
um, as well as build that coalition and collaboration.
Well, I love it. I feel like, that really leads us well into, the latest book that you wrote, Inclusion on Purpose, an intersectional approach to creating a culture of belonging at work. And then you also had a forward from Ijeoma Oluo.
Yes.
First of all, I mean, how did you get that forward?
Oh my goodness. Well, can I tell you that I'm probably the luckiest person in the world where Ijoma and I knew each other. We both live in the Seattle area. She was the editor at large of a women-run um, media website that was started in 2015 called The Establishment. We did shut 3 years later. And I, in many ways, got to know Ijoma. I mean, it was clear I mean, her voice is so deep and so resonant, so clear and so brilliant. And I, was lucky to experience that before she became the Ijoma. And we continue to be friends. We now have spent quite a fair amount of time together. Never enough because obviously she's super booked and busy.
Booked and busy.
Booked and busy, but also someone whose generosity, honestly, is again unparalleled. Again, like really back to this idea of collaboration. Like there are people and there are leaders who say, "Oh, collaboration," and like da da da. Like I really believe in this, and this is great. And again, they say it as a buzzword. And then there are people. I mean, someone like Ijeoma considered writing my forward at a time where her house burnt down. This is public information, so I'm not saying anything folks don't know. Hopefully, you are aware of this horrific thing that happened. Her house burnt down. She literally left with the clothes on her back with her family. She's, of course, had horrific harassment and abuse online. Um, and and even at that time, at such a painful and difficult time in her life, still recognize that, hey, my platform and my words are going to, and she's so humble that I don't know if she actually even recognized that, but literally thought, I think, to herself that, hey, there's this person whom I believe in. And when you believe in someone, you don't do it in quiet, right? You don't do it quietly.
Mm.
And that is it. I mean, literally for her to show up in that way. And then of course she was kind enough to host my launch at Town Hall Seattle. Um, and I literally would not be the person I am if I didn't meet Ijeoma. And actually, I met Ijeoma at a time the first time we met, I was about to be pregnant, and then so she kind of knew me while I was going through this journey, and then certainly of motherhood, and motherhood so white and so painful and so lonely. And I think when you see someone in their whole journey, and in many ways, I have no doubt I made many mistakes. I said a lot of stupid, you know, stuff. I won't I won't curse, but I'm sure I said a lot of stupid things along the way, and certainly must have shown my ignorance, and I'm sure anti-blackness too. And to be able to be forgiven and to be able to be amplified and to be given a platform, knowing that, you know with sort of that level of actual trust in me. I mean, honestly, it is one of the most humbling experiences in my life.
Well, let's talk about, first of all, as it's that's a beautiful thing to hear. And like I think having someone being willing to like kind of work with you and grow with you and share with you, right? Because there's so much seeming like especially in the public arena, there's so much pressure to be perfect, right? Like, there's really little grace to learn and grow and make mistakes. Um, so that's incredible. Let me ask you this, inclusion on purpose. There's so many books of everyone's out here trying to write a book right now, right? Like in this era, like everybody's writing a book. Like talk to me about where do you feel like your book it differentiates from, I'm not gonna say the noise because I'm not gonna just poop on
Mhm.
people's books.
But
Um,
there is a lot of noise out there,
it's
just
a lot of noise out
to
there
be clear.
though. It's noisy out there though.
It
So
is
what
noisy.
so talk to me about how you believe yours differentiates itself.
Mm. Can I tell you that I went into this book process kicking and screaming? I did not intend to write a book. Another book, I wrote The Diversity Advantage: Fixing Gender Inequality in the Workplace back in 2015. intended really, my thought was in some ways it was like those old school brochures, when you would when you would print stuff on your janky little printer in your house, and then you'd staple it and you'd hand it
Yes,
out like
yes.
like those zines and things. I mean, I was a huge fan of those. And my mom has, my very embarrassing like books from when I was 6 and 7 when I would do that. So I
Mm,
intended that sort of like that, like a bit of a playbook off like, oh, well, leaders care about diversity. Let me write a small short playbook where hopefully they'll read it and they'll be like, oh, now I have all the actions. And of course, silly little me, naive little me, nothing like that happened, obviously. And I have to say that, the whole process in many ways did leave me thinking like, people say they want to make change, but they don't actually want to make change. Like, even if you tell them these are the ways to make change, they actually don't want to make change. And I know I sound really naive saying this, but it was definitely hard to see that. It was definitely hard to go through that process. So I came into the book process without any sort of intention to write a book. I had written an article about how corporate diversity efforts leave out women of color. I interviewed my dear friend, three-time book author Minda Harts for that
yes,
article.
yes, yes.
Love Minda, love her so much. And by the way, it's her birthday today. So
It
Minda,
is.
happy birthday, my dear. I sent her a little message, but I mean, truly, what a trailblazer. Truly, talk about grace, talk about leadership, talk about collaboration, amplification. So side note, we love you, Minda.
Side note. Yes, for real. Yes, yes, yes.
But this article comes out, and an agent reaches out to me who is a young woman of color, literally has not, I think by the time we started collaborating, like, I don't think she had done a book by herself. Like, she had not been an agent for a book by herself. She was assisting another agent. And she said, Ruchika, I read this article. I think this is really important, how you write about the importance of women of color in corporate diversity efforts. The reality is, most corporate diversity, equity, inclusion efforts focus on white women and harm women of color. And I'd be curious if you've given thought to writing another book. And I have to say, I spent a long time after she reached out dilly dallying. It was more than, I think it was close to 9 months between the time she reached out and I actually thought about putting a proposal together, because I was just so kind of like what you talked about, the noise. There's so much of noise. Are people really interested in making change? I thought maybe the way that I can, the change I can influence in the world is actually through consulting and through the actual working directly with clients who wanted to make change, and some of them really have. But I just couldn't get a lot of what she said. Miley Beale, my agent, who is now with ARC Literary Agency, it just couldn't get it out of my mind. A lot of the conversation where she was like, look, like, not enough people are talking about DEI from this lens. A lot of the focus is still on, women as a whole, and, whatever, which means white women, or allyship, but it's not really talking about what is it like when you're a woman of color. And she knew that my perspective, again, kind of what I said to you, is that there is a lot of similarity in the experiences, the actual quote unquote microaggressions or exclusionary behavior or words we hear is, yes, it can be different, but the experience of being overlooked, underestimated, second guessed, really in many ways humiliated, gaslit in the workplace is actually quite similar.
Yeah.
And so it became clear that, this was the time to do it. I shopped the book in 2020 before the murder of George Floyd. And I am very proud in many ways of the final product that just came out, because in many ways I was able to write the book I wanted to write. I remember shopping a book proposal out that was not as, I wasn't exactly saying the things I wanted to say, right? I was still sugarcoating it. I was still I mean, the publishing industry is 90% white, right? 85% of acquisitions editors are white. And even now, when I go back and see the list of people whom my agent sent my proposal out to, I think it was 90 something percent white. And so
Yeah.
I'm just really proud that in this moment in time I was able to put something out that really felt like this is how I feel and I'm saying the things I want to say.
That's a blessing. I remember like this was like about a year ago, like I was entertaining the idea of accepting a book deal and and writing about writing about black and brown experiences in the workplace, but I wanted to do it from like a perspective of like really spotlighting like actual stories that Live in Corporate had gathered over time, and like and their experiences, like our experiences in the corporate space. And I wanted it to be something I wanted it to be something a little bit more intimate and like really centering those experiences. And I remember having conversations with several folks who were like wanted me to pivot it and make it into like a book on allyship or a book
Oh
on
my gosh.
right. So like it's just super interesting, like in this space, like how hard it still is to really center and like have the conversations you want to have, especially if they don't center or somehow explicitly serve the majority, right? If they don't, and that's a blessing, right? That you're able to write what you wanted to write, and like you can look at something and like you're comfortable with, you look at the book and you see a reflection of yourself as opposed to something you don't recognize. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I have to say, because in many ways I think my first book in some ways was that. And I was
Mm.
very, I did very much pander to a white audience, a white leadership audience, and center case studies and experiences from white leaders who were trying to make change for gender diversity. Um, and I think more than that, when I think about this book, I that centering of stories, and this is why I really hope that you continue to your book gets out and people read it, because it's the centering of stories that changes minds and hearts. It's not the data. And that's another thing white supremacy will tell you. And I know for sure you must have heard this, where it's like, oh, well, tell me the data about why DEI matters, and give me this data and give me that data. And that you can spout the data until you're blue in the face, because I certainly, I have a memory where I really commit all these facts to memory, and then the reality is that doesn't change minds. It doesn't move you to action either. And in many ways they just try and confuse you. It's like a bait and switch tactic where
100%.
they're like, oh, give us all the data, and you're like, here's all the data, like here's 60 pages of data. And then they're like, oh, well, actually we've decided we want to go with the white consultant, or we want the white person to speak.
So much of that when people ask like for, like when they give you, they ask you questions or tasks to justify your presence or justify whatever you're trying to do. A lot of that stuff is just busy work, and an excuse to tell you no. Like they were never going to say yes,
Right.
right? So it's just like, oh, yo, can you show me like your stats on this, or well, what research did you to get to? And it's like, yo, like I'm not blind. Like I see who y'all be bringing up here, right? Like, and
Hmm.
whatever it is, like these people are not qualified to talk about anything. You just like them, right? And
Hmm.
it's so interesting. Like the older I get, as an aside, like my dad, like he and I are very similar. And like one day he told me, it was like a couple years ago, he's like, son, listen, he's like, nothing really changes after high school. Like it's pretty much the same. It's just that
Hmm.
money is real. He's like, but everything is,
Hmm.
it's popularity, it's who knows
Hmm.
who, it's being cool or being perceived as cool by the right
Yes.
people, and just being in the in crowd, right? Like it is not like things don't really change. Like people, the world is very much like high school is really like your testing ground before the real world. And I was just like, dang. And the older I get, I just look around like, this is some high school stuff. Because like, why do I see the same people popping up at all these panels? Why do I see the same people
Mm.
dropping these
Mhm.
books? And why do I see the same people who are saying the same
Mm.
nonsense Like
Mm-hmm.
like in all these big spaces, just like, oh, okay, because they're the in person. Like we've made a decision that they're just gonna be the representation for whatever. So anyway,
Shout out to Mr. Nunn if that's your father's
that
name
is my
because
that is my dad's
because
name.
because yeah, it's exactly that. That is so profound and it's so true. And again, it really breaks my heart how that popularity contest in many ways um, matters actually sadly a lot more than when you were in high school, right? Because
Yeah.
it makes such a material difference. In many ways, it is the difference between life and death, between health and not health, between, living a life where you have some chance to be who you really are and to self actualize if we think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and not. And that's truly what starts to happen, and much more for people of color, much more for Black people, much more for women of color with other marginalized identities.
It's interesting, like as we think about like this season, I started off this conversation kind of talking about like the state of this work in this space. Like, I'm curious, like, as we look at this decade, like, do you have any predictions? I've been asking like pretty much everyone's been on Living Corporate this year. Like,
Mm,
do you have any predictions about like where this space is going this decade as we look at like the shifting political landscape and like
mm.
this new generation of worker coming into the workplace and like what do you anticipate about corporate DEI?
So let me start by giving you my true hope, and I have a couple of things that make me optimistic. One is I am lucky until recently, until the book came out. I taught quite regularly. I taught college classes in journalism. And this new generation of folks about to enter the workplace are not putting up with the same BS that the past generations of people, especially people of color, had no choice but to put up with. And those options, that ability to choose, and of course I am talking about a certain subset of students, students who are college educated, who have that privilege. But really, more and more I can see that my students are not, they're not about to work for the organizations that I would have given my right leg to have worked for at their age, because they're like, nope, I need to work for a place where I see true representation, where I can see, managers and leaders care about employees, are also climate forward. I mean, obviously, every generation that comes into being obviously is facing much more of a threat than ever before as to whether they'd even have a planet to grow old in. So I think these sorts of things are starting to matter more in a way that certainly I never remembered, even when I was back in grad school. And so that makes me very optimistic. They don't want to put up with bullshit. The second thing that kind of makes me optimistic, and what I hope that my voice adds and very much is in chorus with, in the background, hopefully even, is the importance of this coalition between communities of color, between me as, as an Indian woman, an immigrant woman who has benefited from the model minority myth and benefited from anti-Blackness, and who now says that there is absolutely no way that I'm going to let that continue, at least for myself and as many people as I can influence with my work. I think that building that coalition gives me hope that more of us are going to band together and say, like, we're not putting up with exclusionary practices anymore. And I'm seeing that. I'm really starting to see that more than, again, ever before. And then there's a part of me that, yeah, I think that there are more white people. I think kind of, I think of Ijioma's book Mediocre. I think there are more white people, especially surprisingly white men, who recognize that that whiteness and white supremacy and this promised land that they were promised because they're white men was a pyramid scheme in many ways, right?
Hmm.
And they are just as harmed by this hyper capitalism, racism, by the system that we have set up. They're just as harmed as anybody else, as the people that they were supposed to have power over. And so I'm very hopeful of a future where there's much more power with than power over. I'm not saying everyone by any stretch of the imagination, but I see that much more than ever before. I see hope in I live here in the Seattle area. On the one hand, certainly we have seen what happens when you give megalomaniacs too much money, usually white
Yes.
men. And on
Yes.
the other hand, I see what it's like when more women, yes, white women, but I'm thinking of Mackenzie Scott, who has given away, really unrestricted funding, unrestricted money, right? Grants to organizations led by people of color, and really focus that in her philanthropy and set a model which frankly has never existed before. So it's that balance. It's that, cautiously optimistic focus that I like to operate by, because otherwise, my God, I would just be on fire every day, burning down, if I didn't have that hope. And I know you know this as someone with a young child. I am someone with a young child. I want to remain optimistic for this 5-year-old too.
Yeah, I want to be optimistic, I want to be optimistic. I'm not optimistic. Let me own it though. I'm not. But
Yeah.
I'd like to be.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
tough, right? Like it's tough when like we're in this world in real time. I will say that what gives me the biggest hope is is to see this generation coming up, right? Like the generation my siblings belong to,
Yes.
100% agree. They just don't. They're not going to take it. I'm really just very curious. I'm very curious
Mm,
about like the conflict that's going to arise if, let's say, the GOP continues to gerrymander
mm,
and like
mm,
and like
mm,
and gather political power. So you're going to
mm,
have like this. You're going to have this white supremacist political
mm,
federal power
mm,
against this like really mobilized and energized population community or like grassroots group. And
mm,
I'm curious on what that coming to a head is going to look like, you know what I mean?
mm, mm. It's a good question, and it's a good point. And honestly, and this is one of the reasons why white supremacy is so toxic, because what it has done is it has kept so many Americans with, and I say this as someone who's not American, who is an immigrant and who sees this as an outsider. It has kept so many Americans who are actually aligned in so many ways apart because of white supremacy. And I know this, and I've seen this. I see this a lot in especially my white students who are coming up, who are now in their late teens or early 20s, who again have found that they have been completely betrayed by this promised land that their whiteness was supposed to grant them, because of forces like what's happening in politics, because of course the very, very real threat, continued threat of Trumpism. Without a doubt, without a doubt.
Yeah. um I want to thank you. Like, I feel like we could continue going. This is a long conversation, like a longer pod. I'm thankful that we were able to have it. I appreciate you. I'm excited about everything that you're doing, Ruchika, as well as your book, Inclusion on Purpose, an intersectional approach to creating a culture of belonging at work, written by you and Ejioma Oluo. Forward rather by Ejioma Oluo, and it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. In fact, I want everybody to check out the link in the show notes. Make sure you cop a copy of. And this is not an ad. You know what I'm saying? Which like you didn't come on here trying to press a book.
No,
You know what I'm saying? You didn't slide me somebody like yo say here you
I'm
go.
the like I will say, Zach, I'm the opposite in the sense that I really I hope folks who need my book read it and they find it, and there's validation for people who have been hurt, and there's validation for the efforts of people who want to really practice allyship as a verb, not a noun. But by no means am I like, this is the book, go out and buy it, you must buy it. Like, I have no, that is not, that is the opposite of whom I am, really.
I know I received that because I remember we were supposed to interview earlier. You were like, Zach, look, I'm over here. I don't want to be over you know what you sent me. And I was like, dang, I really appreciate how authentic that was. We pushed it back, remember?
I do. I just, yeah, this is not what I enjoy doing. I like reading, I like writing, I like being in community. I don't like to be the voice of the center. So thank you for making it really comfortable and safe for me to do so. And I appreciate you so much. I appreciate everything you do at Living Corporate and in every way that you show up.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. Ruchika, we will talk to you soon. You're a friend of the show. I look forward to having you back, and not even around when you pull it. In fact, you know what? It'll be like you haven't maybe written a book in mad long. You're just gonna slide back like it's cool.
Please.
Okay.
And maybe next time I'll interview you.
Oh, snap! Okay.
Put those journalism chops back into training. It's been a bit rusty, but I will come back into it.
I love it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And we're back. Yo, thank you so much again to Ruchika Tulshyan. Thank you for all of your work. Thank you for your book. Make sure y'all check it out in the show notes. She's really humble about it. She doesn't do promo. She is a friend. So I consider her a friend. So I want to make sure y'all check out the link in the show notes. Give it a look. And till next time, y'all. Catch you later. Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.